This was a telling week in the battle for the future of the Democratic Party. In Montana, Senator Bernie Sanders' connection to white working-class voters was put to the test as he supported Democrat Rob Quist in the special election for a U.S. House seat. Quist focused his campaign on health care and economic issues, but he ultimately lost to Republican Greg Gianforte, who was charged with assaulting a reporter the day before Election Day. Meanwhile, the DNC is facing pressure from another voting bloc that it's come to rely on, African-American women. In an open letter to DNC Chair Tom Perez, a group of black women write, quote, "Organizing without the engagement of black women will prove to be a losing strategy, and there is much too much at stake for the Democratic Party to ignore black women." And joining me now, one of the signatories to that letter, political strategist L. Joy Williams, and Crystal Ball, author of Reversing the Apocalypse, Hijacking the Democratic Party to Save the World. Thank you both for being here. And L. Joy, I want to start with you. And talk to you a little bit about this letter that you wrote. And this is cut 5 for my producers. I want to read one more little clip of that letter that was written by you and you know, dozens, a couple dozen other women. And it says, "We have voted and organized our communities with little support or investment from the Democratic Party for voter mobilization efforts. We've shown how black women lead, yet the party's leadership from Washington to the state parties have few or no black women in leadership. More and more black women are running for office and winning elections with scant support from Democratic Party infrastructure." Explain.
Well, you know, I come from a school that believes a closed mouth doesn't get fed. And these things that we highlight in the letter is not something new. It's something that our communities have been saying for many elections, that the party itself doesn't invest in the infrastructure, particularly for people of color. And at a time when all of the think pieces and also the Democratic Party's current strategy, at least the public strategy right now, is investing and listening to other members of the coalition that belong to the DNC. Noticeably absent is an investment and a listening tour of black women leaders and black women as a voting bloc, when we are primarily the most loyal voting bloc to the party. And so what we believed is putting words and continuing to shout from the rooftops that we've been doing the organizing. We do it without significant investment from a party structure and from other donors. So we do that already. Now we're screaming loudly that you should pay attention to this base because there's a serious crack in the foundation of this support.
And Tom Perez wrote a response, and he said the following. This was a DNC response that was sent to AM Joy yesterday, and it says, "While African-American women are at the core of our party and of the resistance, they are too often taken for granted. We must change this. That's why we're convening women from across the country to discuss how we can better engage the issues confronting African-American women and partner with them to elect more leaders who share their values." Does that statement satisfy you?
Well, you know, I wish it was a direct statement. You know, while, you know, obviously I love your show, and it's a direct statement to the show, there wasn't this immediate response to even acknowledge the letter and the sentiment within it. And look, we're not looking for just the words, right? We're not looking for a press release response. And even in that response, it says we're listening to women. But our particular response, we are talking black. We said black women, you know, and that's what we want a response to, right? And that doesn't just mean hiring 1 or 2 people to be the face at the party for black women. That's really, we're talking about a deep investment. So it's not only with hires, it's not only going, the party going into communities in October for November elections. We're talking about hiring people for strategy, hiring people and recruiting candidates. We're talking about at all levels of investment, and that's what's missing.
And you know, Crystal, I want to bring you into this because the Democratic Party really, since the election, has been doing this dance where they seem to be sort of chasing the Bernie Sanders supporters around the country. Tom Perez did this big tour where he went around and trying to figure out what went wrong on the side of white voters, not looking at that pretty demonstrable drop in black voter turnout that may have had something to do with voter suppression. It may have had something to do with messaging. And even Hillary Clinton. I know you weren't a Clinton person going back into the primary, but this was even Hillary Clinton the other day at Wellesley in her commencement speech, and this is how she was diagnosing the problems facing the party and the country.
A lot of our fellow Americans have lost faith in the existing economic, social, political, and cultural conditions of our country. Their economic problems and cultural anxiety must be addressed or they will continue to sign up to be foot soldiers in the ongoing conflict between us and them.
And Crystal, are you concerned that the party has become so obsessed with trying to figure out and psych out white working class voters that they are forgetting that black voters really are the core of the base and are the people who will turn out if you reach out to them?
Well, anything that the party does, given where we are right now, and not just our loss in the presidential election, but as we've talked about before, our massive losses across the country in governors' mansions and at the state legislative level, everything we do has to be yes and. We have to absolutely do exactly what Eljoy is saying and make sure that we are paying attention to the people who have gotten us as far as they have gotten us. But the bottom line is, and I think this affects, I think it affects our appeal in white working class communities. I think it affects our appeal and part of why African American turnout was down, why Latinos did not back us the way that we expected to when running against Donald Trump. We do not, as a party, have an economic vision for the future.
But real quick, Crystal, because we are tight on time, but I want to ask you about that, because in Montana, we just ran sort of a petri dish perfect experiment for what you're talking about, right? This was not an election where there were any black people in play. There were some Native Americans, but their votes were pretty suppressed around Montana. This was a white election of white voters, Republicans versus Democrats. Bernie Sanders went in there, supported Quist, the Democrat, that he ran on Bernie's platform. He ran the experiment that you're talking about, all about economics, all about economic issues. There was no racial issue or, identity politics. Democrats couldn't win there. So why is that theory viable if it can't work in Montana?
It's not a petri dish because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. The ads that Gianforte ran against Quist were calling him Nancy Pelosi in a cowboy hat. In other words, tying him to the incredibly damaged national brand. And part of the problem here isn't even a policy or an economic issue. It's also the way that we have chosen and selected candidates. What does Nancy Pelosi mean? She means out-of-touch elite. She means tied into the donor communities. And I'm not even talking about whether that's true or not. That is her brand image. But hold on, let me just finish this point. So when we focus as a party on picking candidates based on their connections to the donor class rather than their connections to the community, that's how we get this national brand. It's not going to take one race to fix it. It's going to take a whole rebranding of the party.
Okay, we're out of time, but I will make the point, and I think it's an important point. Nancy Pelosi actually manages to win elections, right? People down her and sort of tie her as sort of what's wrong with the party.
Wait.
She became.
We've been devastated in the House. We have the smallest caucus since Reconstruction.
Okay,
that's not winning.
We ran, but that was a perfectly Bernie Sanders race. He ran that experiment in Montana. If his message is so powerful to white working class people, why didn't it work?
Because he is still part of an incredibly damaged Democratic Party.
Bernie Sanders isn't part of the Democratic Party.
Bernie Sanders
in Montana. Okay, well, we don't have time. We don't have time. He ran on Bernie Sanders' platform, but we're going to do this again. It's an interesting debate, and I think both of you make great points. Eljoy Williams, Crystal Ball, thank you both. All right, the DNC's Jamie Harrison will be back after a quick break, and he's going to respond to what he just heard. And coming up in our next hour, I'll be joined by Resistance hero Congresswoman Maxine Waters and by Star Trek hero George Takei. Yes, more AM Joe after the break.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.